Hello, this is Jungle Jim at your service. Yes, it has been quite a long time. In fact, you're probably thinking, Jungle Jim? It's been almost 3.5 years. Where have you been? Well, that's a great question. Let me think about that. Let's see, I've been to the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom at least once. Let's see, where else? Oh, I know. I wrote it down in my new Jungles Explorer pouch. Whatever this thing is. Pouch, yes. No, it's not a purse. It's, I got it at a French store, Target. And so, yes, let me see. Oh, yes. and let's see. Oh, I need my Jungle Jim reading glasses because I'm old now and everything looks blurry to me. In fact, and it's a little bit of an embarrassing story because recently I got a hamburger and fries at a restaurant and I sent it back because, well, the food was blurry and I don't like to eat things that look like they're moving. But yes, being a zookeeper and theologian, I also happen to be an explorer. And so I've been to many fun places in the world, some of the more obscure places, like for instance, let's see, oh yes, I've been to the Sahara Desert. It took me a little bit to find that place. I also saw the Amazon Jungle Warehouse. Interestingly enough, they get a lot of orders from monkeys using Amazon Primate. And see, what else? Oh, I wasn't going to admit this, but I did go see Denial. I went to see Antarctica and Uncle Penguin. Oh, and I went to a place in Italy. It was this wide open plain with lots of grass and all sorts of wild animals, elephants, giraffes, and zebras. They called it the Sarin Spaghetti. I even went to see different cities of the world, like over in the Holy Land, one famous for a lady comedian called Bethlehem. I went to another city where, well, I must say that people didn't seem to reason very normally. They called it Kooks Among Us. I even went to Russia and saw one of the great agricultural cities of the world. Agricultural, farming. That's what that entails. And it was called Moscow. And so, yes, I was very impressed. Let's see, where else did I go? Oh, yes, some of them, some landmarks. I did see some very touristy places. Okay, well, the first place I went to was the Eiffel Tower. There weren't many tourists there. I was going to go see Mount Rushmore, but I was very tired at the time, so I decided to go see Mount Rushless. And then I did happen to go see the Great Wall of Fine China. Now, unfortunately, I have to tell you, don't go see the Great Wall of Fine China anytime soon, because after a certain zookeeper / theologian / explorer, who shall remain nameless, tried to climb the Great Wall of Fine China, it didn't turn out so great. In fact, you can now truthfully say that the Great Wall of Fine China is all it's cracked up to be. So no, I don't recommend going to see the Great Wall of Fine China anytime soon. Now let's see, where were we in our Bible stories? Let's see, so in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and created everything in 6 days, made man and woman on the sixth day. Adam and Eve, first man and woman, they were innocent, they gave them a garden to live in, but they sinned, they lost their innocence, and then he kicked them out of the garden, and then Cain and Abel, and Cain was able, killed Abel, and then they lived, and the children had children, and children had children, and then the whole world was full of violent, evil people, and it broke God's heart, and got very sad, and so he had to get rid of all the violent, evil people. But there was one righteous person, his name was Noah. Noah had a wife, he had 3 sons, they had 3 wives. He told Noah to build a boat called the ark, and he built the ark, and then he got in the boat, the wife got in the boat, the 3 sons got in the boat, the 3 daughters got in the boat, and the 3 wives. And then see the animals got in the boat, 2 by 2, etc. And the flood came, and then they got, they were saved from the flood, and then the flood went away, and they got off the boat, and then the children had children, and then God saw a man named Abram, and he had a wife who showed named Amos until I could pronounce it, and then he said to Abram, let's see, oh yes, he was very old, didn't have any children. He said, you're going to have as many descendants as the stars of the sky, sand of the seashore, and then, oh yes, he's going to give you the land of Canaan, which is basically the eastern border of the Mediterranean Sea, and then through your descendant, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, which was the prophecy of Jesus, and then let's see what happened, and then, oh yes, he changed Abram's name to Abraham, his wife's name to Sarah. They gave birth to Isaac. Isaac married Rebecca, and Isaac had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. And, oh yes, that's where we were. Jacob and Esau. We told the story of the twins who were about as identical as a cat and dog food. So yes, I remember this now, because Esau, one time he was very hungry, starving to death. He told his brother Jacob, please give me some of that red stew or I'll die. And Jacob said, sure, I'll give you some red stew if you'll sell me your birthright. Meaning all the extra goodies Esau was going to get from being the firstborn between the 2 of them. And so Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for that red stew. But that was a point of hatred that Esau had for Jacob, a grudge that Jacob did that to him. Of course, he could have said no and found food elsewhere, but he felt like he was going to die at the time. So that's why he sold his birthright. And then later on, we saw that Isaac, who was blind at the time, he'd gotten so old his eyes no longer worked. Not even the old Jungle Jim reading glasses were going to help him. And so it was time for him to pour out blessings on Esau. And because Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob, but Esau also was the firstborn. And so he, by right, was going to be given all these blessings from his father. So Jacob sent Esau out to get wild game. No, he didn't ask him to go see ice hockey. He didn't ask him to go see a game. He was supposed to get wild game, hunt it, kill it, cook it, bring it back to Isaac. And so while Esau was busy doing that, Rebecca overheard what was going on. She loved Jacob much more than Esau, and so she disguised Jacob, sent him in to pretend to be Esau, because Isaac was unable to see. Eventually, Jacob was able to convince Isaac that he was Esau, and so Isaac poured all his blessings out on Jacob, thinking he was the firstborn. And so Jacob, he leaves, and Esau comes in, cooks the food, brings it to his father, and says, here I am, bless me. And Isaac, is dumbfounded. And so he doesn't know what to do. And then they figure it out that Jacob had pretended to be Esau. And so Esau was livid, consoled himself with thoughts of killing his brother. That's how bad the hatred had grown between them. And so Isaac and Rebekah, knowing this, sent Jacob away. Said, go to your mother's family, to her brother Laban, go to his town, his village, find a wife for yourself over there. Because they knew that none of the wives around them were godly wives who would be good to Jacob. So they sent him away for his safety and to find a wife. And so Jacob left. He had the dream, remember, the ladder and the angels going up and down, and he sees the Lord in the sky, and the Lord renews some of the promises that he had made to Abraham and to Isaac, his father and his grandfather. And so Jacob wakes up, and then he ends up going and finding his uncle's village, and he sees Laban's daughter Rachel, falls in love, falls in love at first sight, works 7 years to win her hand in marriage, works for Laban 7 years to have the right to marry Rachel. And then the 7 years come, and then he gets married, and then the next morning he realizes he had been tricked into marrying the wrong woman. He had married Rachel's older sister, Leah. Now this is why, young men, you who have never been married, if you get married, a word of advice: do it in the daytime, where it's nice and bright outside. Might even call it off for a day or two if it's cloudy. Or at least if you're going to get married at night, do it where it's well lit. Lots of, electricity. Because if you do it at night in the dark, I cannot guarantee you're going to marry the woman that you think you're marrying. Just a word of advice. So yes, Jacob goes to Laban, and he says, "What in the world have you done to me?" And then Laban says, "Oh, well, we can't marry the younger daughter before the older one, so, well, you can marry Rachel in a week, and then you can work for me another 7 years." So you can see that Laban had done this in deception, in greed, in selfishness. But it was a little bit of, shall we say, a taste of his own medicine to Jacob, because it's kind of the same principles that he used in selling the stew to Esau to get his birthright. So that's not what love does. Love is the highest value that God has, that he wants us to have. And we don't treat each other this way when we love each other. And so Laban was deceptive and selfish and manipulative in his dealings with Jacob. So this brings us to today's lesson. Jacob has now married Leah and Rachel. And in fact, if you're watching the video, I hope to have this in a podcast version, an audio version, but if you're watching the video, you'll see the title says, Jacob's 4 wives and 12 sons. That's the abridged title, the short one. My whiteboard is only so wide. The real title of today's lesson is Jacob's 4 wives, 12 sons, 1 daughter, and the beginning of antidepressants. In fact, this sets off what I call World War Wife, because there's an intense rivalry between Leah and Rachel that leads to 2 more wives for Jacob, 12 sons, and a daughter. Now, for those of you watching the video, I'm sure you can look up and see that I've written the names here. And just the sons alone, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. The 1 daughter was Dinah. And yes, I'm about to explain the story, but I hear what you're thinking. Okay, and I do applaud you. I know you're straight, and you're like, oh, Jungle Jim, you don't even have to tell me the story. I know what you're about to do. You're about to explain how these children got their names. And I've already figured it out. For example, Jungle Jim, Reuben. His mother named him that because after she gave birth to him, she was hungry for a sandwich. And then Levi got his name because he was the world's first child whose diapers were made of denim. Well, either that or his mother was wearing jeans at the time she gave birth to him. And then Gad, oh, that's a sad story, because Gad was somewhat of an ugly baby. In fact, his father, I'm sure the first time he saw him, said, Egad. And then his mother overheard it and thought he said He-Gad. And so she thought, well, I must name him Gad. And that's how that came about. And then, but Zebulun, oh, that's an easy one, because Zebulun was named after their father's favorite rock band, Led Zeppelin. Oh, that one was too easy. And then Joseph, well, that's the trickiest one, because that's a little bit of Spanglish right there. Joseph. Well, what really happened there is that Rachel, in her prayers, said, Lord, if I have a child, I will name him Jose if he's a son. And so she gave birth to a son, and she named him Jose if, but in the spelling and confusion and all, he came to be pronounced Joseph. And then finally, the last one, his name is Benjamin. Because either A, his mother saw him that he was, great at jumping even after, as a little bitty baby, and so he thought, well, he's going to play basketball and jam basketballs, through the hoop, or he was going to be a great musician. And when you ask him what he's been doing, he'll tell you, I've been jamming. Okay, no, it's Benjamin. And listen, I applaud your efforts. I'm glad you're, wrestling with the scriptures, trying to figure things out. And that's a very good effort on your part. But no, that's not how it went down, shall we say. Oh, there was wrestling, all right, between the sisters, let me tell you. Because here's what happened. Leah was able to have children. Her womb was open. Now, to explain to children that the magic, the wonder of creation, don't panic, parents, inside most women, unless something's just happened to be wrong with their body, God has enabled them to where a baby can come to life inside them and start to grow. Inside a woman's tummy, her belly, what we call a section called the womb. And so when the baby's big enough and old enough and strong enough, what's supposed to happen is then the baby leaves the mother and comes out into the world, and in the process called giving birth. And so Leah her body was able to do this, but Rachel's was not. Leah's womb was open, Rachel's was closed. She was barren, as they say. And so Leah gave birth to a son named Reuben. And Reuben means sea, a son, basically. And the reason she named it that was because she said God saw that she was unloved. You see, Jacob, he never wanted to marry Leah. You talk about the uninvited guest to the party. He was always wanting to marry Rachel. He loved Rachel. The Bible itself, Scripture itself, even describes Rachel as being prettier than Leah. His heart was attracted to her. And so now he's got the wife he never wanted. And so he just didn't muster up the love for Leah that he had for Rachel. And Leah saw that, and God saw that. And so that's why he enabled Leah to have children. He did not enable Rachel to have children, at least not at first. And so it's important to remember God sees you when you're unloved. He sees you when you're not valued. He sees you when you're not appreciated, and he wants to know that he loves you, he values you, and he wants you to trust and follow him. So yes, Leah gives birth to 4 sons. Reuben, and she named him, as I said, See, because God saw she was unloved. Simeon, because Simeon means hearing. Because she said, God heard that I'm unloved. Now this is, before I get to the other two, a little bit ironic, because not only did Leah say after she gave birth to Reuben that God saw she was unloved, she also said, now my husband will see this and love me. And it didn't turn out that way. A little bit of marital advice here. In fact, a couple of points of marital advice. Well, let me just give you one. Okay? If you think that if you do A, it will change your spouse's heart and behavior to where they will do B, it doesn't work out that way most of the time. In fact, oddly enough, the last person that a husband or wife wants changing them in the world is their spouse. I don't know why. I just know it's almost universally that way. In fact, Peter the apostle, follower of Jesus, told women, if you want to win your unbelieving husband to Christ, just do it through actions. Just show him how to live the life. Don't use words. Implication being, that's not going to turn out very well. So yes, Leah thought giving birth to a son would, oh yes, Jacob's going to be so happy, be so proud, and now he'll love me. Well, when she gives birth to Simeon, she named him Hearing because she said, God heard I'm unloved. Jacob still doesn't love her like he loves Rachel. And so Leah said, God heard that I'm unloved. And so now he's blessed me with another son. And that was true. God sees it. God hears it when we're unloved. And he wants you to know you are loved. You are loved. Levi was the third son. She named him Attached, Joining, because she's still thinking, oh, I've given birth to a third son. Now my husband will become attached to me and not my sister. Didn't work that way. Finally, by the time she gives birth to Judah, she said, I'm naming him Praise. I'm praising the Lord. That's what Judah means, praise. And she, nothing about, my husband will love me now. I mean, by that, she was in a bad mood. She's like, forget him. He's not ever going to love me. I'm going to praise God this time. That seems to be the implication there. Now, Rachel sees all this, and she's hot. She's jealous. She's angry. Comes to Jacob, tells him that. Give me children or I'll die. And Jacob's like, what do you want me to do? You want me to go to the local market, pick up some cloth diapers and a baby while I'm there? Go to aisle what in the world for? And buy one? No, I can't do this. God's closed your womb. I'm not God here. Paraphrasing, of course. And so Rachel says, well, here's my servant Bilhah. You marry my servant, and she'll have children on my behalf. Now, we've seen this before. If you recall, Abram's wife, Sarai, I was trying to avoid saying her name, but yes, got fed up with not having children, and she said, Abram, take my servant Hagar, marry her. She'll have children on my behalf. And so Abram did, and remember, Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, but he wasn't the child of promise. God blessed Ishmael and saved Hagar, but he wasn't the child that God had promised. And so, same thing happens here. Rachel says, well, take Bilhah, and she'll have children. And Bilhah did. Now, Rachel, because Bilhah was Rachel's servant, Rachel had the right to name the children. And so Rachel named the first one Dan, meaning he judged, because God is judged between me and my sister, and I'm winning this time. And then Bilhah gave birth to Naphtali, which means my wrestling. Rachel, you can see her in her mind. She's coming off the top ropes with the elbow, boom, right down on her sister's stomach. No, well, okay, they didn't have that kind of wrestling back then, but they did have wrestling. And so, she's envisioned how she's been wrestling with her sister, and now she's coming out on top. Well, meanwhile, Leah sees this. She stopped having children, and now she marches into Jacob, and Jacob's probably sitting there thinking, oh boy, here we go again. Because right by Leah's side, most likely, was Zilpah, Leah's maidservant. And Leah says, all right, Jacob, I'm not giving you children anymore. Rachel's through her servant is, well, you take my maidservant, and you marry her, and she'll have children on my behalf. And so now we're up to wife number 4. And Jacob wasn't fighting anything at this point. He's like, oh boy, wait, white flag, woo, can't do this anymore. Okay, whatever you say. So he married Zilpah, gives birth to Gad. Leah named him Gad because she says, what good fortune, my maidservants had a son. And she names the next one Asher, meaning happy, because you're like, oh, how happy am I that I am beating my sister. There just wasn't much love between them. And so, even after that, Leah, again, she starts having children. Names the next one Issachar. it means hire or reward, and it's a little bit of a complicated story, but basically she hired Jacob back to be her husband because even after all these years and sons, Jacob doesn't love her like he does Rachel. It just doesn't happen. And so the next son she names Zebulun, meaning dwelling together or honor, because again she's thinking, now my husband will dwell with me instead of my sister. It still doesn't really happen that way. Or now my husband will honor me the way he's been honoring my sister, and your just heart bleeds for her. She gives birth to a daughter named Dinah, which means basically judgment, and it's probably more about the judgment that God is having between her and her sister. But then finally, after all that time, Rachel becomes pregnant, gives birth to a son whose name is Joseph. Joseph means may he add. And her thought was, may God add another son to this one. And God does. Later on, she gives birth to Jacob's final child, Benjamin. And I'll read this story. We'll basically close after that. And it's a bit of a sad story. Genesis chapter 35, beginning of verse 16. I want to explain chapters and verses for time's sake. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel travailed in childbirth. And she had hard labor meaning the process by which the baby leaves the mother and comes into the world. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, a midwife is not a wife going through midlife crisis. A midwife is one who helps this process of the baby leaving the mother. The midwife said to her, do not fear, you will have this son also. And so it was as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. Ben-Oni means son of my pain, which makes you wonder why every son in the world is not named Ben-Oni. But his father called him Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand, which would mean he's extremely valued. Benjamin was. Now, I will explain this. Her soul was departing for you children, because we are not just our bodies. There are two major parts to us. Our physical bodies that we can touch and see, but these really just are tools for interacting with the world God created. We can see it. We can hear things. We can touch things. We can, move around in this world thanks to these bodies that God has given us. But inside us, what we really are, our souls, we're spirits. And what happens in death is not that we cease to exist, but we, as our spirits, we leave this body. It's too broken. We can't stay in it anymore. It's unable to house us as spirits or as souls. And so we leave this body and then go where the Father directs us. And so it's a beautiful thing. God forms our bodies, Psalm 139. God forms our spirits, Zechariah 12. In other words, God is intimately involved in your creation, your bodies, your spirits. And so, yes, Rachel unfortunately died when she gave birth to Benjamin. All right, now we will pick up there next time. And so I will just simply say this. This is Jungle Jim leaving you with this thought. The Father loves you deeply. Our bodies and spirits He made. The Son cares for you greatly. The price for our sins He paid. The Spirit values you completely. He leads us to what is right. Trust them, hear them, obey them. It leads to eternal life. This has been Jungle Jim at your service.